everyone to another episode of the Brown Girl Green Show. My name is Christy Drutman, and I interview environmental leaders and advocates about diversity and inclusion and creative solutions to the climate crisis. I'm working to change the image of what it means to be an environmentalist in the 21st century. So anyone who's an audience member today, if you have any other questions for our guests that we're having on today about sustainable investment and talking about personal finance, please put them in the question box. We will be answering your questions during the show towards the end of the episode. So if you have any other questions, put them in the box if anything pops up, and we will get to your questions. So anyways, I am really excited to introduce today's guest. We met freshman year of college such a long time ago. We met at this amazing, I don't even know if you call it like a camp. It was like a training ground.
A summer organizing retreat, SOR.
Summer organizing retreat, SOR.
I don't even know.
2014.
Oh my God, that was so long ago.
And we met at this camp. We were learning about just like, what does it mean to like organize campaigns on college campuses around divestment, so like moving money in college campuses away from fossil fuels. And just like we bonded, we were talking about life, and I was just like, we were both really goofy and we had a good time. And anyways, I just really wanted to invite her on my show today because she is just a wizard when it comes to learning about responsible investment. She has her own show. She is really passionate about this intersection between thinking about how to change the world, but also how to keep your money on lock. So I would love for Joelle to introduce herself and to tell her more about the work that she does.
Thank you, Christy. Well, first of all, thank you so much for hosting me and just for being who you are and for having this platform. I feel really grateful. Like Christy said, we met at the intersection of finance and economy and environmentalism. And I got really passionate about responsible investing in college when I learned that you could take money out of the fossil fuel industry and funnel it back into positive things like sustainable energy or community investment. And since then, I've done a lot of work in impact investing on the research front and also on the investment front. So it's really just my passion and what I have dedicated myself to. And I also just launched my own platform that was also kind of inspired by Christy. It's called The Joelle Show. I'm on Instagram, the.joelle.show. And I just post videos that are kind of simple explainers about economics, personal finance, what's going on. And I'm just getting started, so go give me a like and a subscribe. Shameless plug for myself.
No, you put that out there.
Yes. So that's a little bit about who I am and what I care about and why I do what I do.
So you kind of already answered this question, but how do you feel like you are changing the image of what it means to be an environmentalist today?
Yeah, so I see environmentalism through the lens of business and economy and markets. And the reason that I've focused there is because I believe that we need a multifaceted approach. We need environmentalism everywhere with people attacking it in every different way. So this is my personal way of doing that. But there is so much power and influence that comes with business and the economy and finance. But at the same time, it's also very inaccessible. There are a lot of really scary words and concepts, and just in terms of like actual accessibility, it's really hard to get into. That was kind of my passion, was to learn about it so that we can figure out how we can channel business and economics and finance toward these causes that we care about and hopefully create a more sustainable and just world in that way.
Oh, gave me chills. And I'm wondering, what do you like about your approach? Well, how do you feel like the way that you're going about environmentalism allows you to like stay like driven and passionate about the work that you do?
Yeah, I think what drives me a lot is sharing the information that I have learned. I remember when I was in college and I was studying economics, I would hear words that were like really scary sounding, and then I would learn what they meant and I'd be like, that's it? Like, really? And there are also like 7 words that people use to describe the same thing. And it's like, it's really frustrating. But then when you learn it, you're like, oh, that's manageable. So what really like drives this work for me is just sharing that and like helping people know that they can know these things too. Whether it's like finance or economy or investing or saving, like it is accessible when you break it down into bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, and that is exactly why I have you on today, because I feel like I'm at, I don't want to say square one. Like, I know that things like budgeting is important. I've learned some things about responsible investing, but it's all just like, it feels very like amorphous to me. I don't really know where to even start. So I'm just wondering, in your opinion, like, what is personal finance? In a perfect world, how does someone's personal finance change from like start to finish?
Sure. Yeah. So very base level, personal finance is how you manage your money. And I like to break it up into your current self. So like current Joelle, and then your future self, future Joelle. So I think that a lot of people hear personal finance and think it's not sexy, but it can be sexy when you start to achieve your personal finance goals. So that is like a very important place to start with personal finance, is setting your goals. So that's going to look different for everyone. Some people have high credit cards, credit card debt, I mean, some people just want to save like $1,000. Some people just want to get in control of their spending. So the first thing, how you can use your current self to also set up your future self, because something I would encourage everyone to do is start thinking about retirement now, which we're young and we're like, oh, retirement, like that's so far away. But if you set those things now, you will make it so much easier for yourself in 40 years. So that's the first thing I would say. And then in terms of how you actually enact these things, another thing that I really want to emphasize is behavior. So you also want to set goals that are realistic for yourself, because if you're like, I'm gonna never spend money outside of my house ever again, like that's just not going to happen. But at the same time, you do want to challenge yourself to be disciplined. So like the goals that you set, maybe make it a push goal. If you think, oh, I can only save $100, push that, maybe try to save $1,000 and see how you can make small behavior changes in your everyday life to reach those goals. Did that answer the question? I feel like that was a lot of information.
Let me take it in a moment. I think that was great. I think it sounds like, it depends on the person's like personal aspirations for what they want to do with their money, but it sounds like there's some like core things that need to be, like lined up.
Yeah, exactly. So just to speak really quickly to those core things, just before I get sidetracked, because I can talk about so many things. The way that I kind of break it down into a couple pieces. The first thing is getting your current spending in control and managed. So the way to think about that is just where you're spending your money, how much you're spending, and if you're spending it in the right allocation. And I can talk about that later with budgeting, but that is what budgeting is basically figuring out how you're spending your money and figuring out how you can make that the most efficient for yourself so that you can do other things like the second piece, which is paying down debt. And the important thing here is starting with high interest debt, which is usually credit cards. The longer you have high interest debt like credit cards, the more it grows and the harder it is to pay it off. The other part of that for a lot of people is student debt, which we can also talk about a little bit later. But student debt is something that you kind of will have for like 30 years of your life. So you're going to need to figure out how you can pay that with budgeting. But also you're just going to have to pay that inevitably as part of your like monthly expenses. So kind of figuring that out as well. And there's also a way to defer debt, but we can talk about that later. And so once you've figured out your budget, once you've figured out how you can pay down debt or manage your debt if it's long-term debt, then the last thing you want to think about, or the two last things, is savings. So I would recommend, if you are able to, save at least 10% of your monthly income. That sounds really hard, and for some people it is. And if that's like, can't do that right now, that's totally fine. But once you start to work with your budget and think about how you're managing your money, then you can get to savings. And then that leads to growing your money, which is investing. And that is the last piece. So just to sum that up really quickly, manage your money with a budget, pay down high interest debt like credit cards, and then manage long-term debt like student loans or a mortgage.
Okay.
Then get your savings right. If you can prioritize that, that's super important and will help you. And that can lead to investing, which is growing your money.
Whew, that was excellent.
That's great. A lot of information. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I guess my question is like, so if you were going to like level it out, it sounds like you want to get your debt paid off first and focus on that, and then focus on savings, or like maybe you could like figure out, depending on how you budget it, you could have a bunch of like savings stored away to help with that debt. Is that like kind of how it would work? Like,
yeah,
it's
kind of a combination of things, because sometimes we have to use credit cards just to meet our immediate needs. But credit cards, like I said, that's in that category of high interest debt.
Okay.
And that can be really dangerous for us in the long term, because just to sum up interest really quick, whoever lends you money, like a credit card institution, they say, I'll let you buy $1,000 a month on my dime.
Yeah.
And for the privilege of doing that, I'm going to charge you up to maybe 20% of that $1,000 each month. And then as long as you don't pay down that debt, it grows and it grows and it grows. And so something like 20%, that is a lot. That's like on $1,000, that's $200.
Oh, wow.
So that's why I say focus on the high interest debt first.
Okay.
Things like student loans are usually lower interest rates, like maybe 5%. And it's also just like, it's such a large sum of money for like a large part of your life. So you kind of have to accept that that is going to be just like part of your monthly expenses. But credit cards, you have a little bit more control over. And if you're able to pay that down immediately. And then savings, I would say it probably depends on the person. Like I'd say put your money toward that high interest debt so you can have more money in your pocket.
Okay.
Like right now, today, or next month, so you don't have to pay that. And then when the money is in your pocket, you can save it. It's kind of like on a case-to-case basis. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people think, oh, you have to have like tons of money saved and you're going to be in debt. Like it sounds kind of impossible, but it sounds like break it down based on your priorities and like what you are most valuing, at least in like the moment, but still thinking about your long-term goals. That seems like the right balance to try to execute. And building off of that, money in general is a very sensitive and can feel like a really overwhelming subject. So, I mean, like you just said, you just laid out a bunch of information. Also, if anyone who's listening has a lot of questions or is just like, what is going on, please ask it in the question box. But yeah, I think it's a really like this like uncomfortable, sometimes taboo subject that sometimes people don't want to talk about or acknowledge. And I think that it can be often dismissed as like, oh, I'll worry about that some other time, or I'm just going to say plain out like, oh, I'm broke right now, but I don't actually know what that means. And I'm going to keep having this like lingering thought in the back of my head that I'm like struggling right now, but I don't know what to do. And so I'm just wondering, how do you think we could make today's conversation, especially for young people like around our age, just like more of a conversation that's like more like about like, hey, we can figure this out together, rather than it being like really overwhelming? Do you have any recommendations on how people can like addressing that?
Yeah, totally. And I have had that exact interaction with many people that are very close to me, because you're right, it's very sensitive, and sometimes it just feels easier to not talk about it than to deal with it. But I think that one thing that we can do is think about like the long term and like destigmatize talking about it. If you're in trouble, like that's okay. So many people have financial stress in so many ways, but the thing is that it won't get better unless you confront it, unless you come to terms with it. And I think one way you can do that is kind of like relationships with people that are close to you. I'm always willing to talk about this stuff with people too. And I have had this conversation with a lot of my friends. But the other thing that is kind of different about today is that there are also tools available to us with technology that can also make these things easier. So one of those things that I like is mint.com. You can connect it to your bank account, and then they can show you how much money you're spending. And they also can help you bring in different sources. If you have like a credit card and you're trying to figure out how to pay off that debt or a student loan, you can link it all in the same account. And then I think that just seeing it on paper, like getting it, even if that's too stressful for you, even if you're like, I don't want to use technology, just like getting it down on paper and writing down like, I need this many dollars every month to get by.
Okay.
I'm spending this many dollars every month. Where's the breakdown if I'm spending too much? If I'm spending more than I have available to me, you want to try to live within your means. So the idea behind the exercise of budgeting is, where am I spending that money? And where can I be cutting down? Because there are certain things that you have to pay every month. Rent, utilities, bills, things like that.
Yeah.
So you have to have those things covered. And I call those fixed expenses because they're fixed. They don't change.
Yeah.
Then there are other expenses that are like variable expenses. They vary how much you pay every month. So that's it. If you're spending too much in the variable category, you kind of want to figure that out, and that's the value of putting it on paper and seeing, where am I spending my money? Because if I'm living outside of my means, I'm using my credit card too much, like that is going to put myself in stress in the future. Even if right now I got like a cool, like new hoodie that looks really awesome, in the future, like I'm going to have to figure out how to pay that. So again, that was a lot of information. I hope that's helpful. And I hope that kind of,
great.
Yeah,
I think people don't plan it out. They just are like, okay, I'm going to spend this money because I want to live my best life.
Right.
Which is fine, but it's like that has consequences. And you have to think about, like, is it worth it to have those consequences be met in the short term or the long term? And either way, it's like about just like acknowledging it and making a plan for it is what's
exactly.
important.
And also,
yeah.
Right. And also to the point about this discussion is that you can also live more sustainably and help cut those expenses in different ways. So
yeah, we will get into that in the
next get there.
Someone asked in the question box, which I think is a really interesting question. What do you feel is one of the most common mistakes or misconceptions about personal finance, in your opinion?
Sure. Yeah, I think that like we were just talking about, is that it's too hard. And it's really, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Christy, is that there's just like a lot of stigma around it, and there's just a lot of fear, and people don't respond well to fear. And so I totally understand that. I think that, the best thing you can do is just like start the conversation, get things on paper. The other misconception is that, is this kind of like, I don't know if it's like because we're millennials, but this idea, like, if I do something today, it won't affect me tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is like something they say in economics. There's no such thing as a free lunch, because there's always someone on the other side of things paying for something. Yeah. And so I think that credit cards tend to be a really difficult one, because it feels like, oh, I can pay for these really cool things for my birthday or whatever, and then I'll figure out how to pay it in the future. Something that is probably the best thing you can do for yourself is live within your means. Especially with the big expense categories, same thing like rent, utilities, like that's where you spend the majority of your money. So live within your means, especially there. And then in like the fun money spending, same thing. If you don't have money for something, wait, save until you have money for it.
Yeah. Because
it's so much more stressful to get into debt. It's so much harder to pay it off because of interest. That's how it's built. You will just put yourself in so much better of a position if you live your life, again, sustainably and within your means.
Yes. And moving on to my next question and segueing on that, because obviously the show is talking about the environment, talking about living more sustainably. So I'm interested in your own view. What are some practical ways people can plan money for the future while also considering the environment?
Yeah. I'd say there are a couple different ways to think about it. Okay, so I'll break it up again into what's a good way to think? Okay, well, let's start with budget. Okay, so planning money for the future, again, like I said, you break it down into your rent, your fixed expenses, your fund money, and then with that exercise, you are able to start saving. And then that's how you can kind of plan for the future. Once you have a nest egg, you can use that money to start building wealth. So like I said, I recommend 10% of your income if you are able to. The other thing, given the circumstances right now with coronavirus, I would highly recommend cutting down your expenses so that you can save an emergency fund. An emergency fund is made up of at least 3 months up to 6 months of monthly expenses. And monthly expenses means how much you spend every single month. Obviously, that's not like something you do overnight. I recognize that's totally hard. A good place to start is just try to save rent for the next month. So that is in terms of planning for the future, like for your current self. Then for your future self, let's talk about investing. So investing is, in essence, a way for you to grow your wealth. And I think that it's something that traditionally has felt really inaccessible. But again, with things like technology, we are able now more than ever to invest small sums of money. You can invest like $100 today. And the other thing is that with responsible investing, we can actually put our money where our values are. So the key thing for this that I want to highlight is technology. So the idea behind responsible investing, like I mentioned before, is that you are taking money out of things that say are fossil fuels or things that do not support your values, and then you are refunneling them into positive reinvestment, things like solar companies or renewable energy companies. And so I think that for the longest, I felt like, okay, like investment sounds awesome. How do I do that?
Yeah.
So because it's like someone tells you to invest, like, okay, sure, like how do we even start? So the logistics of how you actually invest. There are a couple different ways. So if you are still employed right now, God willing, and you are fortunate enough that your employer provides a 401k for you, a retirement fund, that is a way that a lot of people invest, where you set aside like 5% of your biweekly check or whatever, and it goes into that retirement account. One way that you can invest responsibly through that is by changing, and you'll have to go through like your employer portal or however that works for you, is for looking for mutual funds or index funds or ETFs. And those are kind of complicated. I would like to explain those things, but it might take a little bit of time. So just think of those really quickly as like investment products, things that will grow your wealth, just for the purpose of like having this discussion. And look for ones that say like green ETF or like sustainable fund. And I think I'll probably just write a blog post about ones that you can look for so you know the actual names of them. So quick recap on that. If you have a 401k, you can look for sustainable investment funds that you can invest. And if your employer does not provide that through like Charles Schwab or whatever, advocate, request that they do provide that, because that is part of why we've seen a good shift in the last few years, is that people are really demanding this more than ever. Okay, so that's the first thing. Similar story for IRAs, which are also investment accounts for retirement. If you are able to, you can choose to invest in sustainable or green or ESG mutual funds or ETFs. Okay, so the next thing is robo-advisors. So this is more if you don't have an employer account like a 401k, but you still want to start making investments. There's this thing called robo-advising. So there's this idea of managing money. So basically, like the idea here is that you and I are not really that sophisticated of investors. We kind of like see a company and we're like, oh, that company looks cool, but there could be all of these things that we don't know about, that maybe they're gonna go bankrupt tomorrow and all this stuff. So that is why we employ others who are professionals to manage our investments for us, because that is what they do all day long, is they research about these companies. They're, you know, doing all these things to make sure that they're making good investments for you. And traditionally that has costed like a good amount of money when you're investing. The cost of investing is the fee that you pay someone to do that.
Mm.
So with technology nowadays, there is this thing called robo-advising, where you can get that managed money. And just so people know that it's like a AI, like algorithms and like technology things are doing the management for you because they're smart, and there's probably like a human component too. But that has decreased the fees so that people like you and I can just pay like 0.25% and we'll get $100 of our money invested in an educated way, so that, you know, you're not putting in $100 into a company that's like going bankrupt tomorrow. Instead, you're putting in a portfolio that is diversified, which just means like you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Okay.
So that is another way that you can access investments. And the way to do that is Google like robo-advise, like best like ESG or sustainable robo-advisors. Go do some research about ones that you like, ones that have low fees, pros and cons of each one. And then you just sign up for the platform, and then they'll ask you some questions, and then you can invest through that. The last thing that I would highlight is you can, and this is a little bit riskier because of kind of what I said before about investing like just directly into companies. You can, if you have a company that you feel really passionate about, that is like, say, like a solar panel company, and you really just want to support that company, you can invest directly in that company by buying their stock. And stock is just like a very small percentage of a company that you get to own by giving them money. So you give them money, in exchange, they give you a very small part of that company. And hopefully over time, the company becomes successful and worth a whole lot of money, so that your small percentage becomes worth more as well. And then you can sell it when you retire and feel really good that you supported like a solar panel company in that way. So similar thing about logistically, how do you actually do that? There are platforms called brokers. And so you just make an account with a broker. One example is Robinhood. They are an app on your phone. So you just sign up, you link it with your bank account, and then you can just buy stocks like that. So with that, again, I would very heavily emphasize that you do your research. Don't just go spending money like, like it's nothing, because investing is hard. And that's also, again, why I would also kind of advocate for paying people to manage it, or robots. Yeah. And so then I guess like to wrap all of that up, the last thing is that the more you advocate for sustainable investments in, like I said, whether it's your 401k or like there's a trading platform and they don't have sustainable options, the more you advocate for that, the more they take it seriously, because they see that as demand for these products. And the more demand there is, the more there's an opportunity for them to get paid, essentially, because that's how like, businesses think. So if there's business opportunity, if there's market opportunity for these advisors or investors to serve a larger basis of clientele, and millennials want this, like there's so much research about how much demand there is for it right now. So the more that you advocate for it, the more options that will be available. That's what we've seen in the last year. I think I saw something that was like, there were like 100 sustainable mutual funds or ETFs or something in 2018. And then in 2019, there were 300. And that has been a product of people really requesting these things.
Yeah, I think that was a lot of info. I think I think everyone got an information bomb right now. I have a similar question as someone who just asked the question in the box is, there's a lot of this talk, especially in the environmental world, like caring about the stock market, caring about these like very like capitalist mechanisms is like the antithesis of caring about the environment, since the stock market is invested in exponential growth. But yet we do need more people, like young people, getting involved in these things and taking back the power of the market, which feels very capitalist, but it's also like, if we're not doing it, where's that money going? So it feels like a really complicated issue that like I face, where it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I want to put my money into the stock market. I would like to see it grow, be invested in companies that I believe in, but yet like this person, the stock market feels like it, is built to not care about the environment. So I'm just wondering what your perspective on that is.
I think to the earlier, like it's a spot on point. Like sustainability is at odds with the stock market and with investments, because it, like, legally, companies in their documents are required to maximize shareholder value.
Yeah.
And that is on a short-term time frame. And how do companies do that? They cut corners, they don't treat employees well, they outsource things, they cut costs in any way that they can. And that's how it has been for the past however many years. But I think that I mean, I totally like hear this, because it's challenging, because at the same time, that is like the system that we have, and that has so much power over how things work. So that is where the advocacy part comes in, because as frustrating as it is to see that, knowing that large corporations are the biggest culprits of environmental degradation, we are seeing some progress, because last year, I think, or maybe at the beginning of this year, there were like 180 CEOs of large companies that pledged to be more sustainable. And I read a couple weeks ago that the State Investment Fund of Japan and CalSTRS, which is, I believe, the pension fund for teachers in California, and then another large asset manager, stated in a press release that they see that companies that are only focused on short-term profits as bad investment partners. And that is because of the advocacy of environmentalists and people who care about social change, are really out here highlighting that sustainability is the only way for us to make this work. So I think that involvement, there are so many ways to enact change. And I think that we need all of those ways. I think one of those ways is involvement and advocacy in the existing system that we have.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And I mean, you kind of already touched on this, but I mean, you kind of already touched on this, but just to put it in like your own words, like you feel like personal finance could make a really big difference while these like financial institutions are invested in fossil fuels and stuff like that. Like you feel like personal finance and the ways people are thinking about their finances and longer term investments could make a big impact on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a lot about our behavior too, because if you've ever heard the term "vote with your dollars," like that does matter, you know. And companies, it does. I mean, people are still going to buy stuff from companies, but with things like social media these days, and like more reporting on malpractice and bad environmental practice, bad social practice, it does damage companies' reputation. So a couple things that you could do like today to start to make change here is your personal spending habits. So where you choose to spend money, which companies you choose to support. If you don't want to support large corporations, you can do research about those corporations and how they treat their employees or the environment, or ask a friend who's really passionate, someone like you or me, if research feels kind of hard in that way. You can also support local enterprises. And I mean that in two ways. So the first thing I think that is an interesting point on this is banking. So the way that banks work, if you bank with a large bank like Wells Fargo or Citibank or whatever, there's this thing called fractional reserve banking. And this is one of those words that I say is like, sounds scary and complicated. The way that this works is that when we put like, I don't know, $100 in our bank account, that's not actually in the bank account. It's the bank keeps a fraction of the deposits that everyone puts in the bank. So it's usually like 10%. They'll keep that on hand just in case, you need to take your money out. The rest of it, they invest. They're lending out to corporations or mortgages or whatever. And with these large banks, something that is challenging with that is that they could be lending out to fossil fuel companies or companies that do not have interest in the environment or people. So something that you can do is move your money from a large bank to a local credit union. And local credit unions are sometimes owned by employees, sometimes owned by local shareholders. And a lot of the time, they don't have that interest to be lending to those large corporations. A lot of the time, they're investing in local community projects or things like financial education. So you get kind of the twofold benefit of not really like contributing to these large corporations, which are large polluters, but you also get the benefit of investing in your local community. And then they also will often offer members benefits because they don't have like that like shareholder like incentive or whatever, where you can have like a higher rate on your savings account or lower fees for different services, things like that. And then the second thing, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah. And then, so I talked about, sorry, I'm going on tangents. I told you this would happen. I was like,
no,
we have to get the important stuff out of the way first so I can go on my tangents. So we talked about voting with your dollars. We talked about where you put your money. We talked about investing and investing positively in clean tech or renewables or things like that. And then the last thing I think is just your day-to-day things too, just like being more sustainable in that way. So you can think about like the budget categories I said before. If you break it down into your rent, I don't know if you can be more sustainable with rent, but with utilities or those fixed bills, you can definitely be more sustainable there. And I'm sure that you have a lot of things here that you've talked about before, which is like, so feel free to jump in, but like turning off the lights, like not keeping appliances plugged into sockets because of like phantom energy usage. Something I saw today is that if you stream on a smaller device that takes up less energy, then that is more energy efficient and will also save you money. Like using less water, not keeping your house using natural heating like sweaters, things like that. So kind of going through each category of your expenses. So like utilities, groceries, same thing with groceries. You can also shop at local co-ops. You can do a Google search like co-ops in Washington or whatever. And same thing, a lot of the time they're owned by workers. They're owned by community members. They can be less expensive, more sustainable. So go through kind of each of those areas of your life that you're spending money and think how you can change your behaviors in really small ways that will save you money, but also will contribute to causes that you care about.
Yeah, I mean, building off of that, I mean, I'm always a big advocate, and I didn't really know this until like last year when I was living on my own, a year out of college. But bulk buying saves you so much money. Right now, it's really difficult because like due to sanitary reasons, a lot of stores are like cutting off bulk buying. But like once this whole mess is over, I highly recommend bulk buying. And I always go with the principle of like find something that is like good for your body, good for your planet, is going to last you a long time. So it's not things that are just like, you buy an item that's only going to last, for like 2 or 3 days. Like buy a lot of certain things and they usually sell it for cheaper because typically a lot of companies sell smaller package units and they charge a ton more. But if you cut out the labor it took to make that packaging or make that small unit item, and you instead budget out your time. I think people think that time is not something you can budget, but time is just as important of budgeting as your money. And I think that when you're thinking about it, okay, yes, I'm gonna have to cook and meal prep these ingredients, but bulk buying that is gonna save you so much more money than buying these like processed like box things that you're probably going to waste and throw away. And I think that like, when we're thinking about sustainability, my biggest recommendation is how can you squeeze the most juice out of an item as possible before you dispose of it? And what of these is going to have like the longest lifespan? So instead of like buying a bunch of cheap disposable napkins, invest in like a towel that's going to last you for years. Like that instantly is going to cut your costs. And I think people don't intuitively think about those things, and they just keep buying the same stuff because we're like conditioned that like that's the way to live your life, but you can actually save money by cutting down those expenses all the time. So I mean, honestly, I feel like a lot of it is just like modern convenience, things like bottled water. Like if you had told someone in the 1950s that we would have bottled water, they would be like, what?
why are you putting water in plastic? Just get it from the sink, like, so I feel like, it's just like, just kind of, I mean, I love what you said. I think it's just like going back to sustainability and things that make sense that you would do without like modern convenience.
Yeah, literally. Like that's going to save you so much more money. It's just going to be more inconvenient because you're like spending more time, but you're not spending more money.
Right.
Building off of that, someone asked, how would you suggest money management for people who are unemployed and or full-time students who are living off of their savings, but also want to support environmental causes?
Okay. I might need you to break that down.
Yes.
Because I think there are a couple different parts there. Yeah.
So it's like, first, money management in general for people who are unemployed or like living off their savings, like paycheck to paycheck. That's like the first part. Then second part is you don't have a lot of money. You want to be sustainable. You want to like support environmental organizations or causes. Is it possible to do both? And if so, how would you do that?
Yeah, I think I mean, super relevant questions just because I feel like so many people are having such a challenge with that right now. So there are a couple ways I'm thinking about this. I think the first is unemployment resources. People may or may not be aware that the government passed a $2 trillion stimulus package, which is intended to help people. Unfortunately, it leaves out a lot of people. So the first thing I would say is look into resources that are available from the government. The second thing I would say is that there has been some really incredible organizing around resources outside of the government. With different mutual aid organizations. And so mutual aid is exactly what it sounds like. It is communities coming together to provide aid to one another, recognizing that some people have been left out, some people don't have access to the same resources as others do, and that people with those resources can help out because we are all connected and we are all a community. So if you are really struggling financially right now, maybe just do a quick Google search, mutual aid funds in my city. I know a friend of mine is helping organize the Mass Redistribution Fund. I think it's redistributionfund.org, which is specific for Massachusetts, but that is that exact idea. There's also one in Washington that is COVID-19 mutual aid. Another large, I think, national body is the New Economy Coalition, which is, I think, neweconomy.net. And you can maybe find some resources there. So that is so that's the first part. I would say, seek out support that's available to you.
Yeah.
The second part, I think, is just, cover those expenses that you have to. There are a lot of states talking about rent and eviction. So I'd say maybe do some research about where your state stands or your city stands with that, because that's the big chunk expenses. If there are other expenses that you're feeling really stressed out about, like student loans, credit cards, call your service provider and see if you can negotiate. Because, they're not dumb. Like, they know what's going on right now. And you might be able to get maybe a lower interest rate. With student loans, you can defer your loans right now, which will really help put money back in people's pockets. And for certain student loan providers, interest is not being charged until September.
Wow.
So that's another way. And then, I think just focus on your survival expenses, focus on those things that you need to get by, see if you can negotiate payments so that it won't affect. I also think I've read, I don't know if this is totally factual, but I've also think that credit scores, there's some forgiveness with credit right now if you end up missing a payment too. Were there other parts of that question that I missed?
The second half was just about how could people still like care about the environment right now while doing this. I have some ideas, but I would love to hear.
Yes. Okay, cool. So I'll pitch my idea and then I would love to hear yours. I think maybe if you aren't able to give financially right now, you can give your time. And there are a lot of, if you're healthy and you're able to, there are a lot of organizations that need a lot of help right now. So I think, again, it's maybe just a quick Google search, volunteer opportunities for XYZ in my city, or reach out to people that you know who are passionate about those issues and see if they need help. Maybe even just your neighbors, who knows, like communities, things like that. That's my thoughts. Christy, back to you.
Honestly, I totally agree with the time thing. If you don't have the money to give to an environmental organization, I would say giving your time, like volunteering, like what you want to be supporting, like whether they're hosting a webinar or they're hosting an online event and they're looking for people who want to share things on social media, do graphic design. There's a lot of people looking for graphic design. I'm looking for graphic design.
Me too.
You can support my show. Like that's some way you can support environmental organizations. Anyways, jokes aside, I would say if you don't have like the money to help out with that, that's really helpful. But if you do have some money, I would say trying to figure out, like, there's definitely companies that are supporting like reducing food waste. There's like local community markets. I think focusing on how you can support your local economy in your community, like that's not directly like environmental, but like we need to support local businesses, because if we're not supporting local businesses and the survival of those, how are we going to support, our local community in future times of crisis like the climate crisis? And I think thinking about local businesses, especially ones that are focused on sustainability, plant-based diets, supporting on amplifying like people of color in the workplace, like I would say support, a takeout meal here and there. I know even some businesses are even offering special discounts on delivery right now. And I think just like looking up and researching how you can support those businesses is really important right now. And outside of that, I would say like there's a lot of organizations working on Earth Day right now, like on Earth Month. People who are going to need more capacity building, environmental justice organizations. I would say slide into their Instagram DM, say, hey, I really love the work you were doing. I just wanted to know like if there's any events you're planning or things I could support with. And I assure you that they need that. So, and me included. So if you want to assist me in the work that I'm doing, I'm always down for that. And so, yeah, I think that those are really great suggestions, Joelle. And I totally agree with that. I think, you kind of already touched on this earlier about an emergency fund. And I think moving forward after COVID, like having an emergency fund is like both a luxury and a necessity at the same time. And I think when we're thinking about climate change and the climate crisis, people really need to start putting their money into something like that. So I just want to know if you had any suggestions on how people could think about an emergency fund. You kind of already talked about it earlier in the episode, but if you could lay that out, because I think that's very central to what we're talking about in this episode.
Yeah, no, totally. So the first part of the emergency fund, it all goes back to budgeting. I'm sorry, everyone, you have to do it, but you have to figure out how much money you spend every month, because that's what you're supposed to base your emergency fund on. So figure out, I'm sorry, everyone. I know it's not sexy, but once you get this, maybe it will be. So figure out how much you need to spend to save for monthly expenses. Then, like I said, the recommended is 3 to 6 months. In circumstances that are not like these, it's ideal that you do this before a crisis happens, like you said. I think that saving for an emergency fund right now is really hard for so many reasons, but absolutely should be prioritized, because I think that there's just a lot of uncertainty about how long this is going to last. And to be honest, I don't say this to be like alarmist or anything, but I've just been, I watched a podcast or a YouTube with the International Monetary Fund, and they're expecting a very significant impact because the magnitude that the coronavirus has had on everyone so instantaneously. So I think the reality is that this could last for a long time, and we need to prepare ourselves for that reality. So in terms of how you can save incrementally, I mean, it's hard because people right now who are like paycheck to paycheck or don't have a paycheck, you're already not spending anything. Like, it's not like you have extra money to spare, which is why I said seek out those resources if they are available via the government or externally via mutual aid organizations. Yeah. If you are still employed, and you still have some source of income, pinch your pennies. And I mean, fortunately, like, it's not like we can go out right now. Like, it's not like you can like go shopping or anything. So add that extra money, put that into a savings account immediately. And like, I think the other thing is like, it doesn't have to be like $100 at a time. It can literally be like $5, $10. Maybe make a savings goal for a week, maybe $10 a week or something like that. Something that feels manageable for you, but that you stick to and you commit to, because really you're investing in yourself for the future.
Yeah.
There was one other thing that I was going to say that I forgot. Okay. The other thing is that might help with your savings is, you know, if all of your money's going out the door, maybe think about how you can make new money. Obviously that's really hard right now, but if you have a skill that is really great that you can offer via like social media or like a website or something, like a lot of tools are free on the internet to market yourself. So if you're able to give like singing lessons, or like, I don't know, you're a great dancer and you can give people dance lessons on Instagram, see if you can be entrepreneurial and create a side hustle to make more money for yourself. So that's how I would say for that. I hope that helps, but I know it's super challenging right now.
It's so challenging, but I think it's really important to think about in the long term. But I think in the short term, just focus on, you know, paying off your debts, figuring out how to budget. And I think also like something I want to bring up on my end is think about how you're interacting as a group with like the people that you live with. I think people underestimate the power of collective buying. And I think that like collective living can save you a lot of money because you're buying bigger portions of things, but you're spending less on it. And I think that that's something a lot of people need to rely on right now, is like, especially if you live with other people, it may be awkward, it may be uncomfortable, but be like, hey, I'm really in debt. Are you really in debt? Like, are you as stressed out about what's going on right now as me? And then we can like bulk buy according to our values together, the products we want to buy, and you're going to probably save a ton more money and it's going to last you longer. So I say rely on your community for support. I don't always like to recommend people make GoFundMes because that can be really stressful and like can actually like put a lot of stress on yourself to like rely that externally. I think it's more about like, how can I start building these networks of support with others to like purchase items and like build wealth together? Because there's also options where I think like you could like maybe set aside some time with your housemates or the people you live with or friends on a Zoom chat and be like, you know what, let's just sit down and like make a budget together. Like, let's make a Google sheet together. Like, I know I had to do that. Like, my friend helped me budget out my entire trip I had a few months ago. And if like they didn't do that with me, it wouldn't have happened. And it literally, like, I think having someone in your life to hold you accountable towards that, and maybe it's awkward, but it could be a fun activity you do in quarantine to start figuring out. And not only is it a fun thing, it's a necessary thing. So that way you're not freaking out. Like, you actually know to the dollar how much money you have to spend on your food, your utilities, your rent. And then maybe if there's like $5 to $10 left, okay, I'm going to put this in an emergency fund. So I'm also not stressing out about investing that tenfold in the future. And I think that, you know, these longer term, bigger, like getting into the stock market stuff, maybe that's a little further down the line after you just get your basic survival down. But I think that thinking about these things is very like practical, sustainable ways that you can like save money right now and be saving little by little for future disasters like this is really important. So I think that's great.
I completely agree. I think just to add to that too, that one thing that made me think of is that there will probably be more aid packages coming in the future because, like I said, this will be a long-term thing. It's not going to get solved overnight. One thing that we can all do from our homes is call our local representatives and advocate for the aid that you need. Because I mean, the stimulus check was good. That was a step forward, but again, it excluded so many people and there are so many things that we still need. And as long as we know that there's more coming, why not try to advocate for yourself and your community at the same time?
100%. Everyone who asked questions, you did such a great job. You really helped form this conversation. And I just want to ask you, Joelle, like, you know, this hour literally zoomed by, but what for like the everyday person who has no wealth, who's living paycheck to paycheck, what would you like them to remember after listening to this week's podcast episode?
That's such a good question. I think know that it is possible to get through living paycheck to paycheck. It's so hard. And doing the things that I recommended, they're not easy. Like I said, they really are not sexy. Like, it's really not fun to do these things. And as you mentioned earlier, Christy, it can be very like sensitive and unsettling. But I want people to know that it is accessible and that there are also people in your lives who can help you. So if you feel so inclined to reach out to people, honestly, you can reach out to me, The Joelle Show on Instagram, the.joelle.show. Like there are resources out there that can help you. I think also something that I feel like I get stuck up on personally is like, I feel like I have this idea of something I will never know how to do. But I think just like simply researching some things that feel like scary or foreign, like for me, the hardest part about doing that is literally just the first step of like opening up Google and then like typing in that question. And that feels scary. And then you start reading articles and you're like, oh, I don't know what that means. But something that's been really affirming to me is that I have built this base of knowledge from feeling that way at the very beginning. And I've continually been scared and learning, but it really does add up. And also like, there are so many resources out there right now. Like I said, you can reach out to me or people that you know, like anything like that. And I just, I hope that people can try to move past the fear and the stigma of personal finance, because I know it's scary, but it can be very freeing and like a catalyst for you to kind of move into the next phase of your life. So
yeah,
I hope that this information helps. Like, I know with the investing stuff too, like that, I mean, that is a whole other thing. I try to keep it simple for now. Like, I think I just need to do a video about that. And I think I'll probably write a blog post too, to point people to resources, because there is like so much to know about investing.
There's so many questions, but I think that this was a great start to just put it into people's brains. And I think a big point I want to drive home is that, like, yes, we are currently in this economic system. Yes, there's other ways that like we can learn to live cooperatively and to like avoid that system and figure out how to, you know, play the system to our benefit while also living sustainably. But I think that like until you actually recognize, you know, the financial burden that's placed on a lot of people, it's very hard for people to care about or think about things like the environment when you're financially struggling. And I think in order for us to get to that point of figuring out how we can all live more sustainably and care about the climate, we need to give people a base level to feel like secure where they're at. And then like to figure out this stuff. And those things don't have to be a dichotomy, but they currently are. And we have to continue to push the language forward that encourages people, hey, you know, you can be responsible with your finances and care about the planet at the same time. And it's just a day-by-day process of figuring out how to bring that to people. And that's how we collectively come together and rise up. So thank you so much, Joelle. This was like so awesome, unreal. Thank you everyone for joining. This is Brown Girl Green. I interview environmental leaders and advocates about diversity and inclusion and creative ways to solve the climate crisis. And we were joined with one of my favorite women in my life, Joelle. You can follow her at The Joelle Show. And we will catch you on the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Christy.
Bye.